Governor Gavin Newsom recently tapped Sacramento Mayor Darrell Steinberg to lead a new commission on homelessness and supportive housing. I sat down with the mayor for a one-on-one interview to ask him about his vision for leading the state on the issue.
I believe that we can make a real dent in the homeless problem, not just here in Sacramento, but in the entire state of California. I don't presume that we can cure the problem. It's so complex and so large. But I think we can make a demonstrable difference. And I think there are some key principles that need to guide us. One, we need to build to scale what we know already works. We're getting people off the streets. It's just we haven't applied the strategies to more people. For example, in Sacramento, the city, we have gotten hundreds of people off the streets over the last 2 years. We have to translate the hundreds into thousands. And here are those common elements. We need more assertive outreach. We're funding that through our whole person care project that is funded by the state and federal government with local partners, the healthcare systems and the city of Sacramento. The governor himself has put $100 million into expanding assertive outreach, whole person care throughout the state. We need more case management, again funded by whole person care. When somebody gets off the street, they need to be enveloped with the support system to be able to stay off the street. We need more low barrier triage. We've shown in North Sacramento off Railroad Avenue that if you meet people where they're at and address the 3 Ps, pets, possessions, and partners, that people who have been homeless, living on the riverbank, living on the streets for years or decades, are willing to come on into shelter. And without that low barrier approach, many people are unwilling to do so. We need more permanent housing. Again, there's good, solid initial support from the new administration to do more on the housing side. These are the common elements. And then there's a counterpart to all of it. While we know what it takes to get thousands of people off the streets, we have to spend as much focus and attention on preventing people from becoming homeless in the first place. Because the most Pyrrhic of victories would be to get tens of thousands of people off the streets of California, only to have people not feel the difference because they've been replaced by a new cohort of as many people or more people. And so prevention and early intervention. There is a point in time where somebody goes from fragile and housed to fragile and unhoused. We need to focus on that moment, and we need to intervene when people have that unexpected medical expense, or the car breaks down, or they lose a job. Certainly the issue of rent and the cost of rent is something that the state and local governments need to grapple with. But it's that intervention. When somebody is housed, we should do everything in our power to make sure that they don't become unhoused. And so finally, the state, I believe, needs to take a different attitude towards this problem. And I think the Governor Newsom, is showing that, and I hope I can help him in this way. We treat homelessness very different than we treat people who are victims of natural disasters. We it's not that we shrug, but we accept the fact that homelessness is a part of our society. And while our efforts are very real, I would argue in the main, given the state of the emergency, that our efforts are relatively modest. We don't act the same way when victims of wildfires are without a home. We don't do the same when victims of other natural disasters find themselves without a home. This is a public safety, a public health emergency. And it's a crisis of conscience as well. And I look forward to working with the governor and the legislature to elevate this issue to the state of emergency that it is, because there are too many people suffering, and our communities are suffering as well from the impacts of seeing it grow. Nothing is going to be easy. I don't presume we're going to cure it, but I think by focusing on those key elements of getting people off the streets, prevention and early intervention, and then elevating this to the emergency that it is, we can make a difference.
Homelessness is a very complex issue.
Yes.
A lot of people that are on the street, they might be suffering from a mental illness. They might be suffering from a substance abuse addiction.
Yes.
What can we do? You spoke earlier about triage. What can we do as a community, as a state, as fellow citizens to help address these issues?
Well, I think we have to, one, approach the problem differently, recognizing that people are homeless for very different reasons. There are some people who are homeless for economic reasons, who with just a little bit of help can get back into housing. There are people who have been living on the streets for years or decades with serious substance abuse and mental health issues. They require that full-on assertive outreach, case management, triage, permanent housing, mental health and substance abuse resources, which is actually the fifth element that I meant to mention earlier, that people need. There are people who are victims of, women who are victims of domestic violence. They need protection and a different kind of help. And so I do think that while we need to elevate our attention to this entire issue and think of it as the state of emergency, which it is, that our approaches need to be discrete and varied depending upon the reason why people find themselves in the worst of worst situations.
So the city just had its biennial, the county just had its
Yeah.
biennial point in time count. A lot of people are anticipating that the number is going to be higher this year than it was in 2017.
Yes, I expect that.
Yeah. So what would you say we can do, using the language you said, emergency, triage, to get more immediate housing for these people?
Well, build to scale what is already working. We have one 100-bed triage facility in North Sacramento. I've put out a plan backed by about $37 million of real funding, some of it city funding, some of it state funding, some of it from the private sector, to expand our triage capacity eightfold. I call it the 100 times 8 proposal, where I ask each of my colleagues to come up with 100 beds. By the way, 800 beds is actually 2,400 beds, because we expect that people will be able to move through on an average every 4 months. And so that creates 2,400 beds a year. If we stick with that, think about it, over 2-3 years, and we're consistent and we're focused, we can get thousands of people off the streets.
You mentioned earlier that there are different reasons that people are homeless. One of them could be they're living paycheck to paycheck. Maybe
Yes.
they lose their job, they're not able to pay rent. What can we do about the cost of living and affordable housing? That's a big issue for Governor Newsom.
Yes.
Is that part of your vision?
Well, of course it is. And it's related to homelessness, even though in some ways it's a separate issue, but it is related to homelessness. We need more housing affordability in Sacramento and in the state. And I think the governor is approaching this in all the right ways, which is we need to be aggressive about making it easier for the nonprofit developers and even the for-profit affordable housing developers to be able to build. For those cities that are not doing their fair share, we need to make it clear that everyone needs to do their fair share. And then we need more subsidy, more resources to be able to partner with the private sector, to be able to move fast. You know, it takes too long. And between money and reforming those rules that make it more difficult to build what we say we want and need more of, we can make a real difference in California.
So full disclosure, I used to work for the Downtown Sacramento Partnership.
Uh-huh.
I was a navigator. I interacted with
Wow.
homeless people on the street every day. It's one of the toughest jobs that I've ever done in my entire life. One thing that I encountered is what I refer to as the revolving door.
Yeah.
People that they get picked up by police, maybe they're loitering, perhaps they're drunk in public, they get taken to a hospital for evaluation, released from the hospital, put back out on the street. What can we do about the laws to make sure that these people are getting the help they need?
Well, first of all, our police and fire departments are often the first and last resorts for people who are on the street. And while I have great respect and admiration for what they do and I'm very thankful to them, it shouldn't all be their jobs. We need more whole person care, more trained social workers, more trained people that are out on the streets interacting with the volume of people and getting as many of them off the streets as possible. It cannot be this revolving door. That's not good, by the way, for the taxpayers. It's not what the police and fire personnel signed up to do. And it is costly. And in many respects, it's not humane, even though they do a humane job, because it's not addressing the underlying reasons why people find themselves in these situations. And so whole person care, again, just to be clear, is a collaboration, $64 million, between the federal government, the state government, the city of Sacramento, and our private healthcare partners. We've got all the major hospitals and the healthcare plans invested in this because they don't want their hospital emergency rooms to be the only place where people can go. We need more triage. We need more housing. We need more mental health and substance abuse services. This is what we're working on in Sacramento and what we're going to work on, what we're working on throughout the state of California. Build the scale, what we know works. Focus on prevention and early intervention, prevent people from becoming homeless, and elevate this issue as the public health and public safety emergency that it is.
What would you say to critics who say you've been in government a long time and homelessness hasn't gotten better in their view? What would you say to them to, ease their concerns as you move forward with your vision for the state?
Well, I know that in the 2 years prior to my becoming mayor of Sacramento, the last point in time count, census count, homelessness increased 85% before I became mayor. So I know that by not being aggressive about it, by the city not choosing to become engaged in a very real way, both funding and leading, that the problem will grow worse on its own. Look, there are many reasons why that's occurred. We're still, in some ways, people are still recovering from the worst recession in modern history. The cost of housing is increasing throughout the state of California. We don't have enough supply. We need more of it. I fervently believe that homelessness does not have to be hopelessness. We know what works, but it is committing to scale what has worked for actually thousands of people. No one should be forsaken. No one should be forgotten. The people on the streets deserve better, and so do our communities, both our business community and our neighborhoods. Homelessness is no longer just a downtown issue. It's not just concentrated in one part. It's everywhere. And it's incumbent upon us as leaders and as good people to do everything we can to help as many people as we can, and also to make the streets themselves cleaner and safer. That's what we aim to do. And if you don't stretch, if you don't set a big goal, then whether or not you get there, you'll get a lot farther by stretching. I don't claim we're going to cure this in any way. I just think we can make it better.